Hey, this is Travis from Birmingham. How you guys doing today?
Good. How you doing, Travis?
Doing pretty good. So I was calling in today because last week I had a caller. He was calling in, and he was kind of conflicted about voting for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And he was just kind of, you remember the call I was talking about?
I think so. We've had a couple like that, but yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the reason I was calling in today is just to kind of, you guys have talked about it on the show a lot. You made the point about how when you vote for an individual, you're not just voting for them. You're just voting to kind of affirm your agreement with them and their policies, but you're kind of voting for their entire administration and, all of the subsequent hires, at every level of government that will kind of come after that.
Yep.
And so I was
their susceptibility to the coalitions that get them into office.
Exactly. Right. So I was calling today because I have like a personal anecdote about something that kind of happened to me, and I feel like it would kind of really benefit and kind of drive that point home if it would kind of allow me a little bit. It's not crazy long, but I mean, it is a little bit of a story.
Okay, go ahead. Try and do it as quick as you can, but go ahead.
Right. Okay. So, I graduated from ITT Technical Institute. That is a for-profit college. I think you guys have had some guests on the show to talk about how they've been cracked down on in the last kind of decade or so by the Department of Education. And, they've had to forgive a lot of student loan debt that has come from these colleges that have been defrauding students.
Yeah, and to be specific, it was the Obama administration. It's one of the best things that the Obama administration did, in my opinion, among I would say like the Iran deal. They cracked down on this, and I can tell you this for a fact. On the day that Donald Trump won, if you go back and look at the rocket that was for-profit colleges, like I think if there was an ETF of for-profit colleges, it went up like a rocket, not like an airplane, but like a rocket on the day that Donald Trump won. The stocks of these for-profit companies went through the roof because they knew there would be less enforcement. But go ahead.
Exactly. So when the ruling came down that kind of was associated with my school, ITT Tech, I submitted what was called a defense to repayment claim to basically have my loans forgiven and to hopefully be reimbursed for what I had paid into those loans. So I submitted my claim in 2016. This is back during the primary when, Bernie was still running. And obviously Trump won that election. Ultimately, he beat Hillary. When he got into office, he put Betsy DeVos in charge of the Department of Education. And for basically 4 years, the claim that I put in to have my loans forgiven, the defense to repayment claim, it basically sat. And it was like that for me and like a bunch of other people too. I think I read an article that said about 100,000 of these claims got submitted. And over the course of that 4 years when Betsy DeVos was in charge of the Department of Education, like less than 100 of them actually got processed and completed.
Back in August of 2022, the Department of Education basically approved a batch that I think was 200,000 of these back claims worth about $4 billion. And the program was basically, if these for-profit universities were found to be par in terms of providing an actual education, these loans were forgiven under the auspices of it being sort of quasi-fraud.
Right, correct. And so my loan was one of those ones that was forgiven, I guess, in that huge backlog. But that didn't happen until after 2020 when Biden won and he got in office and he installed Miguel Cardona as the Department of Education Secretary. I didn't hear any correspondence or get any communication from the Department of Education for the 4 years when Betsy DeVos was in place. But then when Biden wins, he puts Cardona in place. Probably about 6 months later, I started to actually get communication from them saying like, hey, we're processing your claims and, we're going to, contact you if we need any more information from you, yada, yada, yada. And then about 4 months after that, they finally did complete my claim. federally held loans that I owed on had been completely discharged, and I got a check in the mail directly from the Treasury for about $14,000, which was like a life-changing amount of money for me. And so, just to kind of wrap it up, I know I'm taking up a lot of time here. This isn't like a thing where I'm trying to just say, support Biden because my loans were forgiven because of Biden, because honestly, it didn't have anything to do with him. This is a process that started like way back when Obama was in office.
Right.
But just the simple fact that his administration was in place and that department was actually able to function versus a Republican administration being in place and, them doing jack shit for 4 years and, actually attempting to do things that benefit these for-profit colleges and whatnot. That's the difference right there as far as how voting for one person can, have a macro effect across all of these different departments and affect people's lives in different ways. I just kind of wanted to call in and, just make that point and tell that story and just kind of hope that helps people. And this is, I'm not trying to like convince people to vote for Biden per se, just because I kind of agree with that caller from last week as far as his position and not wanting to support Biden because he refuses to call for a ceasefire. But
right.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's you're not voting to support everything about an individual. I mean, I'm a black man. I mean, obviously, I have my qualms with Biden and his stances in the past on a lot of things, but it's kind of lesser of two evils voting, harm reduction voting, whatever you want to call it. But these are the things you kind of have to consider when you're deciding who to pull that lever for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think your call is relevant to the point that we make, which is that the parties aren't exactly the same. And it's foolish that people that want to argue and say in support of a ceasefire, which is an urgent necessity, to fall back on that rhetorically is just like, it's not true to people's eyes or like your experience. Yeah, thanks for that call.
Appreciate the call.
No problem. You guys have a good one.
You too.
Now, like relevant to when
right.
people are saying like that's a relevant story to tell with regards to the parties aren't the same thing and who should you vote for. Now, when people say, well, how do we stop what's going on in Gaza, it's not irrelevant for the Democratic Party to start talking about that stuff, because the concern is how do we stop this, not how we're going to vote in several months.
I agree. Bryce from LA. I also had my ITT Tech wiped out. It lowered my SL account balance by 100,000. If a student loan account by 100,000. If it wasn't for Biden getting elected, that wouldn't have happened. Those
ITT ads were everywhere when I was growing up.
Everywhere. That was one of the things that Obama, I think, did that was not quite as heralded as it could have been. I mean, these aren't earth-shattering things. There's no one, a thing, but that I think Obama probably was sensitive to the fact that a lot of these for-profit universities would prey upon, particularly Black women in their late 20s, early 30s, who were in the workplace and realized their lack of a degree, or felt that their lack of a degree was inhibiting their ability to make more money. They would sign up for these universities to get the degree, and for a lot of these so-called for-profit universities, the agenda was, how do we hold our students past the point where they get their second installment of their loan? That was basically the strategy, because the loans come on a quarterly basis or something like that. So it's almost like the radio industry. How do I hold the audience over the commercial break into the next 15 minutes? And that's where my ratings pop. That's the way it was with getting the loans. Something like 92% of the revenue of for-profit universities comes from the U.S. government in the form of student loans. Calling from a 619 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi. This is Ricky calling from Tijuana, Mexico.
Ricky from Tijuana, Mexico. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm from San Diego, but down here right now. So there were a couple points of analysis that I took away. I read through the ICJ provisional order and stuff, but also the declarations and the poor, dissenting opinion attached that I wanted to add, and then also some points on domestic law and get your feedback on, because I do think it has implications for voting, like it's been talked about. But with regard to the ICJ ruling, something I haven't heard discussed anywhere was the declaration of Judge Xue, I think it is. It's XUE. And I think it's indicative of probably China's position on this. And, the declaration is basically a statement of intent or opinion that is appended. And the judge, unlike the rest of the provisional order, takes a definitive, factual stance on the fact that Israel is intentionally targeting and killing civilians. Not that it's just like this humanitarian disaster. And she goes further by not only saying that, basically referencing the Wall case, like was talked about, but essentially saying the court should affirm an erga omne partes obligation on all states to bring before the ICJ the Palestine question to adjudicate and basically solve. And that's a new development. There has been talks about a multilateral framework towards addressing the matter as just a unified peace conference, but it seems like China is comfortable with having the ICJ essentially adjudicate it. One last point is that the South African team, firstly, I think, especially because Hamas is not party to the litigation, they probably should have asked for specific performance, asking the Israelis or asking the court to order the Israelis to withdraw and not basically fire rounds into the Gaza Strip, because it doesn't deprive them of the right to repel any forces, but more effectively solves the issue of killing rather than a ceasefire, which can impose on Hamas. And the court can impose additional provisional orders in terms of noncompliance at the report stage on its own volition or at motion by South Africa. To continue on to domestic law, there's no precedent for it because nobody's ever been tried for genocide. But genocide is a crime, and ironically, the criminalization of genocide was introduced by Biden. He was the person who wrote the bill. And I believe it passed in 87 or 88. But it criminalizes genocide and imposes 20 years life or the death penalty in cases of genocide. Now, Joe Biden is aiding and abetting in genocide. And moreover, it's a conspiracy among the top, administration officials. So there's no statute of limitations on this. And I think we need to be calling for not just a ceasefire, but prosecution criminally under these statutes. But going further, it's ironic because not only did Joe Biden pass the law, he's about to have his Justice Department set the precedent that official acts taken by a president are prosecutable, even after the president's, duration in office. And with that in consideration, I think, I think the moral question on our minds really needs to be how to end the occupation. Because this isn't just a genocide. This is a revolution happening at the same time, if you look at what's going on the ground. And I totally get I agree that Biden is better on domestic policy 100% across the board. And in terms of general stated opinions on matters of policy, obviously Joe Biden has a more moderate position. But in terms of the balance of forces, the broader implications of participating in elections, and the political results within the electorate and the activist base that occur based on an election, I think it's arguable because of both action and reaction that Trump would have, being less ideological, more self-interested, potentially being interested in convicting Joe Biden of a crime, that it's a Lyndon B. Johnson Nixon case where there's a lot of paradoxes at play. So, that's basically what I have, and your feedback would be interesting. I haven't crystallized where I am yet.
think that, your argument is that ultimately, in terms of harm, that Trump would actually be a mitigation of harm.
Not so much. I would say that with Biden, I've never seen, and I think you've mentioned how surprised you are, I've never seen him be more ideological on something. And I'm convinced that he just has it in his mind that this is something he'll back till the end. I mean, this guy introduced the criminalization of this genocide, and that if he is elected again, that only emboldens him to continue his policy. Whereas Trump, who's self-interested, non-ideological, I think there's a non-zero chance and a more likely chance than Biden that he would end up taking some position in a negotiation process that is more likely to be more favorable, especially in the long term, just on the Palestinian question, not on domestic policy.
I think it's arguable. I think it's arguable what you're saying. I think there's an arguable truth to it. I mean, I think certainly the Biden calculation, although I will say this, that if you look at the polling in this country, the people who are being alienated or the people who are angry about this significantly tend to be Democratic voters versus Republican
for
voters.
Sure.
So
100%.
even in terms of assessing Trump's self-interest, I just don't see the forces that would act upon him. Now, it's quite possible that Biden is impervious, because I agree with you. He seems to be ideologically wed to this. Now, with that said, you're starting to see more and more reporting that the administration is starting to worry about what's happening maybe in Michigan amongst the Arab American community. The administration is starting to worry about.
I think that's gone. I think that's.
Well, I understand. But my point is, putting aside whether those people are recapturable or not, you're starting to see that permeate the consciousness of the administration. Whether that actually impacts their behavior going forward, I don't know. But I can stipulate that it doesn't, right? Because for the sake of this argument, that it doesn't. I just don't see, even if Trump is operating on his own self-interest, where it's in his self-interest to not pursue the same policy. Like he cut funding to UNRWA without any reason. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
I recognize all that.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think you have an argument. I happen to not agree with it, but I think it's at least an argument that has some rationality to it.
Mm-hmm. Would you put, I think the measure is, I think we as Americans have an obligation to really put this before all out. I totally live in Tijuana. The border, I mean, if you cross without the pre-approved, CHS transport, quick access pass I have, it takes 4 hours to cross the border into San Diego. People do it every day. So I know the practical implications on domestic policy. I think it's literally not only weighing I think, again, my arguments would mainly be that the resulting long-term political impact, more broadly than just the immediate electoral impact, but also that I do think Trump, I understand that he's got a much larger nominal number of supporters who are Zionists just because of the evangelical Christians. But like he said, I think he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and get away with it. And he's going to get convicted, and he could get away with it too. So I think he, especially going into this other term with his authoritarian tendencies, where he's going to care more about basically a populist basis support and populist support over any type of institutional support. I just think the chance, percentage-wise, that there is
I know what you're saying. You're just restating your argument. You're restating your argument, and I will tell you this. I don't think Trump is going to enforce anything on Joe Biden that he thinks might be able to be enforced upon him upon his exit from the presidency, if that ever happens. But B, I will also tell you this, that if Donald Trump was to become president and the Israeli assault on Gaza was continuing in the same way that it was today, it will vanish from the news. It will not be a political issue at all in this country.
I totally disagree. I
right.
I think that
we can't assess that, and we can go over it again. But I can just tell you that, in the same way that immigration became a much bigger issue when it was Donald Trump, because it triggered the alignment of wanting to be against Trump and sympathies that lay with immigration within the Democratic Party and the Democratic coalitions. They aligned, and the issue became big. But when Joe Biden came in, that Democratic constituency that wanted to support Joe Biden, it undercut the sort of the intensity and, if any, of the concern about immigration policies. And that just happened. Yeah. I mean, that's undeniable. And I think you will see the exact same dynamic in the context of Israel Palestine. That it is an issue that we read about all the time right now, because it is mainly Democratic constituencies who are mad about this, to the extent that the American public is upset about this. It is Democratic constituencies, and it jeopardizes Joe Biden. When that dynamic is gone, there is all the incentives in the world for the media to no longer cover that story.
Yeah, and I'll just butt in here with where
I appreciate the call.
I agree with the sense of if the UAW say wanted to withhold its endorsement because they had the ceasefire vote and they want to stick to that, I think that would have been righteous, and I would absolutely defended it. Where I get lost is I don't think the individual right as Americans to help send a message with our vote. I think that'd be nice if that was the case, but I don't think that was what happened when
but that's not the argument that he's making. I mean, to be fair, his argument is he just thinks that Donald Trump is more likely to constrain Israel. Right. And because he doesn't have the ideological fervor that Biden has. And my argument is that there's absolutely no incentive for Trump to do that. And that there is no incentive for the media to even cover this dynamic. If you just look at the polling, the American public does not feel as strongly about this as we would want them to. And to the extent that there is a cohort of the American public that does, they are more likely to vote for Joe Biden. And therefore the story becomes Joe Biden doing something that is pissing off a significant, or depending on who you talk to, it's pissing off a significant cohort of his voters. This is like when we talk about why coalitional politics works. Donald Trump, there's no damage to Donald Trump. The people who are going to be pissed at him about this are people who would not vote for him for the most part anyways. And so like, and he has constituencies who are far more, sort of like interested in supporting Israel without constraint.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why even the caller surprised at what Joe Biden is doing, because there's no political benefit for him in that. There just isn't. He could have easily called for a ceasefire, and it would not have hurt him at all politically.
Yeah, if Trump had the Thomas Massey position on Israel Palestine, it might be a more interesting conversation. But yeah, I don't see a real strong indication that he would restrain Bibi at all.
And JR in Philly says no one's restraining Israel. They don't give a crap. Well, but you could cut off arms and see if that constrains them. I happen to believe it would.